We're at Chaf Dalet Amud Aleph. I understand that yesterday the DAF only got right to the top, so that's where we'll pick it up from, unless there's any objections. No? Okay. So the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Kama Haya Gavoa Ul'ayin Haya Nota. How high was the moon in the sky, and which direction was it leaning? The following discussion of the Gemara actually doesn't relate to this piece of the Mishnah, but it quotes it here probably in error. Tana Chada, we learned in one Raizel, it's Fona. If they answer the question as to which side the moon was compared to the sun is to the north, then we believe them. Lidroma, but if he says the moon was seen to the south of the sun, Leomar Klum, the witnesses didn't say anything, we reject that testimony, and we proceed, we throw it out. Tanya, but we learned in another brisa different ibcha, exactly the opposite way. Lidroma, if you see the moon, if the witnesses say the moon is in the south, dvarav kayamin, their words are upheld and we accept the testimony. Utzfona, but if they say that they saw the moon in the north to the north of the sun, le'omar klum, then their testimony is rejected. They say nothing and it doesn't count. So Lakasha, the Gemara answers this and says it's not a question. Kan bi mosachama, one of these brises is talking about in the summer. Kan bi mosakshamim, and the other one is talking about in the winter. So in between the summer and the winter, we have a difference of the path of the sun. As it was explained yesterday, but Rashi has a whole long Rashi here. I think we'll go through that Rashi inside as to the way the sun is moving, and that, according to Rashi, Rashi has a particular explanation on how that affects where the moon is relative to the sun when you would see it. So just to second Rashi on the Amud at the top, Kambi Mosachama, Kambi Mosakshamim. B'mosachama, during the summer months, Kidon Biyam Aruch, a long day, Shal Tkufas Tammuz, of the Tkuf of Tammuz in the summer, Chamos Shokas L'sof Marov L'tzad Safon. The sunset is at the end of the west elevation towards the north. So we have in the summer a much longer day. The sun spends a lot more time in the sky. It rises relative to where we're standing, looking out, more northerly, travels up into the south and loops around back and sets way in the north end of the west. Kedetanya ve'erevin, like we learned in Erevin, Chama Yotzeis biyom aruch, it goes out on a long day, v'shokas biyom aruch, and it sets on a long day. Zehu pnei tzafon, on the north towards the north. Chama Yotzeis biyom kotzer, v'shokas biyom kotzer, when it says that the sun rises and sets on a short day. Zehu pnei dorim, that is on the sun rises and sets towards the south. So Nisan v'Tishrei, on Nisan and Tishrei, which are the equinoxes, Chama Yotzeis b'chati mizrach, v'shakas b'chati marov, the days are exactly even, 12 hours day, 12 hours night, so the sun rises and sets right on the equator, neither to the north nor to the south. Tkufas Nisan, for the Tkufas Nisan in the spring equinox, Hayom v'layla shavin, the day and the night are equal. Chama Yotzeis b'chati mizrach, the sun rises halfway in the east. U'mahaleches chati mizrach, it travels along the eastern horizon, that half of the eastern horizon as it's rising up towards the south. V'chol darom, the entire south elevation it passes by. V'chati marov, half of the western elevation. V'shokas, and then it sets on the west, again at the equator, halfway across the horizon. Uvalayla, and at night, sovevis lamalo min akipa chati marov, it goes above the kippah, Gemara astronomy, half of the west, v'chol tzafon, the entire north, v'chati mizrach, the other half of the mizrach, v'zorachas, and it rises again. U'lamachros hischil hayom lios zoreach ma'at mikeneged chati mizrach l'tzad tzafon. It moves, sunrise, the following day is a little more northward than it was, right? As we travel through the year, the sun rises and sets, keeps moving north and south as we go. That's how we get our difference between the winter and the summer. So after the spring equinox, it starts moving north a little, which means it's got further to travel in the east, further to travel in the west, and the days start getting longer. And it sets a little bit further than the halfway point on the western horizon. L'tzad tzafon, again more to the north. V'chein kol yom v'yom, every day that follows, nimsheches ma'at, it stretches a little bit more, bein bezricha, bein b'shkia, both at sunrise and at sunset. Ukshemagia yom tkufas tamuz, and when it gets to the summer solstice at tkufas tamuz, hizarachas bekeren mizrachis tzfonis, it's all the way in the northeast corner of the sky is sunrise, or as far north as it's going to get. Umahaleches gimel ruchos, and then the sun travels 3 full, not quite full, but for the purposes, full horizons, the entire east, the most it's going to travel in the east, across the entire south horizon, and then down in the west again, setting in the northmost portion that it will set for the year. Vishokas Bekaren Tzonis Maravis sets in the northwestmost position that it would do. Umishon ve'elech, and from that point on in the calendar, Hayomim Misma'atin, the days start getting shorter. Ve-chatima nimsheches ma'at bezrichaso uv'shkiyaso l'tzadaram, and every day sunrise and sunset move a little bit more towards the south. So along the east and west, they keep moving more southwards. And we get to Tkufas Tishrei, the autumn equinox. Yotzes b'chatzi mizrach v'shokas b'chatzi marav. Again, as an equinox is, it rises and sets halfway on the east and west horizons. Vayom v'layla shavim, and day and night are of equal lengths. V'od mosheches v'holeches l'tzadarom, and then the continues going southward, the sunrise and sunset, at Tkufas Teves, until Tkufas Teves, the winter solstice, where it's the shortest day. The oso hayom, and on that day, yotzes bekeren mizrachis dromis v'shokas bekeren dromis maravis. It rises in its most southeast and sets in its most southwest position. Umishon ve'elech, and from that point on, nimshachas la'acharei l'tzad tzafon l'zrichasa u'marba hiluchu l'tzad tzafon ma'at. Again, it starts moving back north again, and the days start getting longer. V'shokas, and sets a little bit more towards the north. V'chein tamid, and this is the constant circle, at Tkufas Nisan, until we again reach back to the spring equinox, where we started from, sheyotzes b'chatzi mizrach v'shokas b'chatzi marav, where it rises in the midpoint on the eastern horizon and sets on the midpoint on the western horizon. So nimtzeis b'yamos achama malechas rov ruach maravis lifnei shkiasa. So it turns out that in the summer months, well, the days are getting longer, it spends more time on the west elevation before it sets, upa'amim kula, and sometimes it goes the entire west horizon before it sets. V'chol yamos hagashamim, but the entire winter season, einam haleches elumiut marav, it only goes a little bit on the western horizon. Upa'amim einon nechneses ba'elu dover mud, only barely touches. The sun looks like it's even in the south portion, just sort of comes up and straight down. We don't really see it coming back along on the west. And according to Rashi, this is the point that we're trying to get to, when you have a new moon, it always appears in the southwest corner of the sky. So the moon's location is constant according to Rashi. Hilkach, therefore, b'yamos hakshamim, in the winter, that the sun only enters into the western part of the horizon, really close to when it is about to set. Halavana kodemes l'sol chamarov, the moon precedes the sun into the west of the sky. Nimtzeis, it comes out levana b'tzafon, the moon appears to be north of where the sun sets. And in the summer, shachama b'marov, where the sun spends a lot of time in the west before it sets. Harbehi kodemes halavon, it's there much before the moon. So therefore, in that case, we'd say the sun would be to the south of the moon would be to the south of the sun. And so for most of those months, it will come out that the sun is on the moon is on the south of the sun. Now there are objections raised to this Rashi, because we know that the moon is not always seen in the southwest quadrant. If you looked outside last night, if you left Shul, the moon was way to the north, was way out over there somewhere. So there are many objections raised to this Rashi. The two main other alternate explanations to what we mean that sometimes it's in the south, sometimes it's in the north, is either because the moon basically follows the path of the sun. As I said, the new moon follows the sun, doesn't lead the sun, so it either will set in the summer, like the sun, to the west of the the north of the midpoint, in which case we would say it's to the north. And in the winter, when it follows the sun and sets down over in the south portion, we'd say it's to the south, going by north and south, not being moon relative to the sun, but moon relative to the equator, or the equator of what we're looking at, so the midpoint in the horizon. That's the one explanation that we can apply to it. The other is north or south relative to where we see the sun setting at the time. So even though the moon basically follows the path of the sun through the sky, it's not it doesn't follow it exactly. It's either by the time we see the new moon, the moon is already a little bit ahead of the sun on the, I don't know how much astronomy has been done with the rest of this, but along what they call the celestial plane, which is where everything that we see travels around through the sky, the moon precedes the sun by about 12 degrees by the time it's visible. So in as the sun is moving more towards the north, the moon is a little bit ahead north. So in the summer months, as the sun is moving north, the moon will set further north of the sun because it's further along, it's leading it. In the winter, when it's going the other way and the sun is setting more south every day, the moon is setting even more south than that every day, so you'd say the moon is to the south of the setting sun. Clear?
It's as clear as it's going to get to us.
I'm not sure if that's a good answer or not.
It's clear enough to move on.
So the simplest way is, the simplest explanation is, the way we explain is the moon to the north and south is, does it set to the north or south of the midpoint of the west horizon? That's if anything else confuses you, that's the simplest way to explain it and understand it.
So yesterday's moonrise was still south of the sunset, even though it was very north.
Yesterday's moonrise, according to the way we're explaining it, would have been to the
Even though it was very north, it's still south of the.
No, it would have been the moonrise. Moon set would have been.
No, the moonrise.
Oh, the moonrise would have been on the other side. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Back to the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanon. Echad Omer, this is the second part. One of the questions that the BAYT asked the witnesses when they came is, how high was the moon visible in the sky? So Echad Omer Gova Beis Mardos. One says it was 2 Mardos high. A Mardea is a kind of cattle prod, a long pointy stick. They used to poke the ox to get them to move. So I guess it came in standard lengths. If you went to your ox supply shop and they had only one size of mardea, so it was a good way to estimate the height. Ve'echad Omer Gimel, one says it was 3 high in the sky. Edusan kayemes. Then even though there is a discrepancy between what the two witnesses say, we do say that's good enough because they're estimating up in the sky. It's a little bit hard, maybe, it's close enough, and we're going to accept it. We don't disqualify this testimony based on this discrepancy. Echad Omer Gimel ve'echad Omer Hey. If one says it was 3 mardos high, and the other witness said it was 5 mardos high, it appears that this is what the Gemara is pointing out here is a difference of 2 mardos, not specifically 2 to 3, because why doesn't it say 2 and 4? But if there's a larger difference of about 2 mardos, which is significant, a dusum betelo, that's already too much. We cannot say that they're testifying on the same thing. There's a discrepancy there, and we have to nullify. We don't accept their testimony, and we throw it out. Avol, but contrary to in other cases, mitzdarfen la'edus acheres, we don't consider them to be dishonest, and we allow them to join in for another testimony of the new moon. So if somebody else comes and says, hey, I also saw it 5 high, we can say, okay, you that said 5 before, you that said 5 now, you guys together, you are a new pair, go ahead, and we accept that as testimony.
It's entirely possible that they saw it at different times, right?
I would assume that part of the questioning would also then include the time, because it is, right, the moon travels, so it's not always in the same spot. So it doesn't ask what time they saw it, but I would assume that's part of what would go into establishing this. Tana Rabbanan. Ra'inuhu b'mayim, ra'inuhu ba'ashishis, ra'inuhu ba'avim. So if they came with any of these 3 cases, they said, we didn't actually see the moon in the sky, but we saw the reflection of the moon either on the water, ba'ashishis, in some kind of glass or crystal. Those of you who have Art Scroll translates it as a lantern. Ra'inuhu ba'avim, or we saw it in the clouds. So again, we didn't actually see it, but we saw what looked like it through the clouds. Ein me'idin alav. That is not a good testimony. We don't accept that as a testimony. Chetzio b'mayim, the witnesses come and they say, we saw half of it in the water. Chetzio b'ovim, half of it in the clouds. Chetzio b'ashishis, half of it in the glass. Ein me'idin alav. We also do not accept it. For clarification, that doesn't mean that they saw this. Your first assumption is if they're saying that half of it in the water, half of it up in the sky, that's actually the Gemara's answer. In the Havamina right now, the Gemara assumes that they only saw half. Period. So the Gemara then asks, Hashda kulo amart lo chetzim ibayit. If we're not going to accept their testimony, if they say we saw the whole reflection of the moon in the water, I was looking out on the lake, I was sitting up by the cottage, and I saw the reflection of the moon in the water, that's no good. So what I have to tell you, if I only see half of the reflection of the moon, it's no good. Of course the half of the reflection is no good. Elohachi Kamer, the Gemara answers, this is what it means to say, Chetzio b'mayim, Chetzio b'rakia. If they came and we saw half of it reflected, half of it in the sky. Chetzio b'avim, Chetzio b'rakia, we saw half of it was behind the cloud, half of it was sticking out of the cloud. Chetzio b'ashishis, we saw half a reflection in this glass. Chetzio b'rakia, half of it in the sky. Ein me'idin. Again, we don't take that testimony. The most interesting one of those three is actually the Chetzio b'mayim, because if you're seeing it out on the water, and you see half of it in the sky and half of it in the water, you're actually seeing the same half twice. You're not even seeing the whole one. The other one's in the clouds. You can see half it's behind the clouds, half it's in front. But the water, very clearly, you're not even seeing the whole moon in the first place. Next case. Tana Rabbanon. Re'inuhu v'shuvlo re'inuhu. Ein me'idin alav. If they came and they said, we were outside, we saw the moon, so we came back in, and then we went out to actually look for it so we can, make sure we saw it clearly in order to give our testimony, that testimony is no good. So the assumption is that they saw it, they came back in, whatever it was, they went to get their notepads to take notes because they knew they're going to get grilled, whatever it is, they came back out to look for it for the purposes of the Eidos, and they were not able to relocate the moon. So the Gemara first says, Kol hachi chazula, v'azli, do they need to see it the whole time? Are you trying to tell me that from the point of the time the witnesses actually see the moon until the time they show up in Beis Din, they need to keep an eye on the moon? Like if it disappears for a minute, then they can't give testimony anymore? So that obviously can't be. That doesn't make any sense. Amar Abaye, Hachi Kamar, Ra'inhu me'elenu, we saw it on our own, as I explained at the beginning. V'shavnu l'roso me'edusenu, we came to look at it again in order to give the testimony, for the purposes of testimony. V'lo we couldn't find it. We didn't see it at that point. So ein me'idin alav, that we cannot accept. My taima, why? What's the reason we don't accept that? They just saw some halo through the clouds. It was a little reflection. Something was going on in the sky, but what they saw was not the moon because they couldn't find it again. Right? It's not that they came. The second time they looked for it, they couldn't. The third time they saw it, they saw something. They went to actually look at it, and it was no longer there. So if it's no longer there, we disqualify what they saw the first time. Next Mishnah. Rosh based in Omer Mekudash. So now we're getting after they've grilled the witnesses. They've established that they did see what they should have seen, and it is a new moon. It's time to declare Rosh Chodesh. So the head of the Beis Din says Mekudash, that the month is sanctified. V'chol ha'am, and all the gathered people around. Onin acharov Mekudash. They answer double Mekudash. Ben Shenira Bismano. So according to the Tanakama, whether the new moon was seen on its correct time on the 30th day of the month, or if it was not seen on its correct time on the 31st day of the month. So if it was seen on the 30th day, it would be a 29-day month. After we declare Rosh Chodesh, if it was seen on the 31st day, it would be a 30-day month, the previous month. In either case, so we still are Mekadesh, we sanctify the month with a declaration.
Even though it's automatically...
Right, even though it would, by the time it's going to be a 30-day month, it would still be automatically. We still, according to the first opinion in the Mishnah, require a specific declaration of Mekudash, of sanctifying the month. And there's basically two stages here. There's setting of the month. In other words, saying, yes, this is the month, which would happen is that automatically after you hit a certain point, and which they get after they grill the witnesses and they make up their mind to do it. And then there's a second step of actually being Mekadesh, sanctifying the month and saying Mekudash. Rebbe Elazar bar Tzadok Omer. Rebbe Elazar bar Tzadok has a separate opinion. Im lo nira bizmano ein mekadchen oso. If it was not seen at its proper time, i.e., it was seen on the 31st day, and the previous month is now Ibor month. And mekadchen oso, we do not have to be mekadesh it. We are not mekadesh it. Shekvar kidshu shemaim, because on its own it has become mekudash. So there's no need to do the mekudash part of this process.
It's interesting, a chuppah, the Adam are the ones who say Mekadesh. Here, the Adam, the one who testify, and the Beis Din says Mekadesh. As opposed to the Adam, right? And so the Adam...
But chuppah, the Adam don't say...
Huh?
I've had experience. You don't... The Masada Kedusha says Mekadesh when... Once the Adam are grilled, did you see it in this and... The Adam don't usually say.
The Adam say it also.
The Adam say it?
Yeah. Yeah, but I've played enough.
I remember them asking, like...
Yeah, they say Mekadesh.
Saw this.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean,
That's just the Adam?
They're the ones who say, they're the ones, as opposed to here, where the Adam of testifying, where the Beis Din comes afterwards and says Mekadesh.
I mean, just to take a stab at it, though, I think the basic difference is here we're grilling the Adam on what the reality is, because Adam are what they can't testify that the month is Mekudash, right? They can only testify on what the position of the moon is. In the case of a chuppah, right, what the Adam are testifying on, we don't really say, did they put the ring on this finger? Did they put the ring? Was she Mekudash? Yes. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Okay, so the Gemara starts Rosh based in Mechule Menachem Mili. How do we know this? Where do we learn this from?
Sorry if I interrupted.
No.
But like this is the last opinion of Rebbe Elazar. It seems to go against everything we've been learning till now. That based is the ones that makes this Mekadesh. It's Charla Bishmaini.
So again, that's what I say. It's not the difference of setting them. Based in still has to say this is the new month, but there's two steps in the process. There's based in establishing that it's Rosh Chodesh, and there's the process we described at the beginning of the Mishnah of being Mekadesh the Chodesh. This Mekudash.
Right.
So what he's saying is you don't do the Mekudash part of it,
right,
but based in would still say, okay, good, your testimony is accepted. They would still. It's not just that when the 31st day comes, they say, "Okay, that's it. Well, we don't need you guys. You can all go home." They would still bring in the witnesses. They would still examine the witnesses. They would state, "Okay, you guys, we accept your testimony. Right. Today is Rosh Chodesh," but they wouldn't say Mekudash
because it's been done already.
Because it's right. There's no need to be Mekadesh it.
He still says that's go through Beis Din.
Right. Beis Din still is the one that sets the Rosh Chodesh and sets the new month. So Menachem Mili, how do we know that the Rosh Beis Din has to be Mekadesh the month? It's not just enough to set it and ring a bell or whatever else there might be. Amar Reb Chia bar Gamda, Amar Reb Yossi ben Shol, Amar Revi, Amar Kra. It says in the pasuk, Vaydaber Moshe es Moadei Hashem, that Moshe said over the Moadim of Hashem, so that we see from the pasuk Moshe said it, and Moshe was the Rosh Beis Din. Mikan Rosh Beis Din Omer Mekudash. So the Rosh Beis Din has to have utterance has to be the one that says it is Mekudash and sanctifies it. That's what we're learning from that pasuk that Moshe said it over. The Mishnah continues. Everybody gathered answers back Mekudash. So Minolan, how do we know that we require a response from the people around? Amar Rav Papa, or Papa says, Amar Kro, we learn from the pasuk Asher Tikra'u Osam, that you plural will call them. So we see from there's a requirement from the people, plural, not just Beis Din, to respond. Everybody else has to respond as well.
But Beis Din is plural already.
Beis Din is plural already. So it's broken down a little bit further. The ArtScroll does a wonderful job of that one. It's not brought down in Rashi here, where they say because it's either a two double lashon of plural, right? Asher tikra'u osam, that we're either learning out from the double plural, that it's a bigger multitude, or tikru osam, because osam could be read, it's written without the vav, atem, you, so those not based in would be us in this context, would be atem, it would be you. So we're learning it out that way, that we require a response for this process, this ceremony of being Mekadesh the Chodesh. Right. Oh, sorry. Osam kari be atem. Right. We're reading it atem that you would call it. You would be the ones that would call it Mekudash. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Elahem Moadai. The pasuk we learned from a different spot. It says Elahem Moadai. These are my Moadim. Haim Yomru Moadai. That again, sorry, I got them a little bit confused. The first one, the Gemara was very clear with Osam versus Atem. The Gemara is very clear. We're learning it out because it can be read Atem, you, the respondents. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak's separate answer, he's learning it from a different pasuk. Elahem, these are they, Moadai, my festivals, plural again. Haim, we're learning out from here, the Haim, that they, the other people, should say that they are Mekudash. So Mekudash Trey Zimni Lameli. So fine, we see that we need Rosh Beishtin to say Mekudash. We see we need a response from the people that are present. But why do I need them to respond in a double Mekudash? Tersiv Mikra'e Kodesh. The pasuk says Mikra'e, callings, holy. Mikra'e is plural as well, so we need more than one calling, so they repeat the word Mekudash. Mishnah continues, Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Tzadok Omer im lo niro bizmano en mekachenoso. If the moon was not seen in its zman on the 30th day of the month, then there is no requirement to do the Kiddushin ceremony on the moon, to be mekadosh the moon. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, Plimo Omer, Plimo says, Bizmano ein mekachenoso. If it's seen in its proper time on the 30th, in that case, you do not have to be mekadesh it. Shelo bizmano, but when the moon is seen on the 31st day of the month, and therefore it is a 30-day month, in that case mekachenoso. That's the case where you actually have to be mekadesh it. Rashi says she'enot tzarich chizuk. If it appears when we're expecting it on the 30th day, and we have a 29-day month, that's standard, right? That's a standard month. So we don't need to be mekadesh it. So everybody knows that's the month. We need to be mekadesh it to add this extra sort of seal, stamp of approval from Beis Din when we're extending the month by a day and making it a 30-day month. So he argues on Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Tzadok and on the Tanakama of the Mishnah. Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon Omer, Benkach uvenkach ein mekachino. So he holds that there's no requirement. All these drushes we just learned out, they're just drushes. There's no actual requirement to ever be mekadesh the month. So that's where we get there's a distinct difference between Beis Din setting the month and this ceremony of being mekadesh the chodesh. Shenemar, so how does he know that? It says in the pasuk by Yovel, "V'kidashtem es shnas hachamishim," you shall declare holy the 50th year. Shonim ato mekadesh, we are mekadesh years. V'ato mekadesh chodashim, but we are not mekadesh the months. So there's no obligation ever to be mekadesh a chodesh. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halach Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok. So Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says the halacha is like Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, that if the new moon is seen on the 30th day and we're going to have a 29-day month, then we are mekadesh it. If it's seen on the 31st day and we have a 30-day month, in that case there is no longer any need to be mekadesh the month. Amar Abaye, af anant nami tnina. Abaye said we also learned likewise a proof to this. Ra'uhu Beis Din v'chol Yisrael. The moon was so obvious, everybody saw it. Beis Din, everybody walking around saw this new moon. Nechkeru ha'edim, so the edim came, they grilled them, and they checked out. V'lo yispiku lomer mekudash ad shechashecha. But by the time it actually got dark, they had not yet gotten around to the point where they can actually say the mekudash part. Harezem ubar. The month is mu'ubar, right? Because we said Beis Din is not mekadesh the chodesh at night. Beis Din is only mekadesh the chodesh during the day. So it took too long. The sun set. It's now night. Rosh Chodesh is by default now going to be the next day on the 31st. We're going to have a 30-day month. So we're picking out of this ubar in mekudash lo, right? It says in that brisa that if they don't get it by night, then the month is me'ubar. It's going to be extended, but it is not going to be mekudash. It says there's no it doesn't say that they have to be mekadesh it on the next day. It just says the month's me'ubar. Period. We're done. So we see that should there be a uber month where we have a 30-day month, there's no requirement to be mekadesh the month. So Gemara answers no. Istrachale. We need to have this lashon of meuber specifically. Why? Salkadai tachaminu. You may think to say hoil virao Beis Din v'chol Yisrael, since Beis Din and everybody else saw it. If Firsuma, it's well known. Everybody knows it's coming. Everybody's expecting it today on the 29th day, V'loili Brua, and then maybe you wouldn't even say, everybody knows, this is just a technicality. Really, Rosh Chodesh is today, on the 30th day. It was a 29-day month. Today was Rosh Chodesh. So Kamash Malon, no, it's coming to tell you specifically that in that case you must make it an extended month. You have to make it an Uber month of 30 days. Rosh Chodesh is the next day. But the wording of this brisa that says that it is Me'ubar is not coming to exclude a requirement for being Mekadesh a 30-day month. So it's not a proof. We still have, the last thing we have is Rabbi Yehuda paskening like Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok, but Abaye's proof falls away because not necessarily can we learn out from the wording of the Mishnah that there is no requirement to be Mekadesh a month of 30 days. Okay, next Mishnah. These shapes and figures of the moon, Rabbi Gamliel had on a board and on his wall, Baliyaso in his attic, in his upper chamber, Shebohen Mara es Hadyotos, that he used to show the simple folk will translate it as the Omer Hakozero Isa Okazeh. So in order just to get clarity on what they saw, people are often not good with describing technical details with which they are not familiar. So to make life easier, was it like this? Was it like this? How did it look? To make it a little bit easier for the people to give the proper testimony. So Gemara asks, Mishari, is he allowed to? Was Rabbi Gamliel allowed to do this? To have these images of the moon? V'oksiv, we have the pasuk says, Lo sa'asun iti, you shall not make with me, referring to Avodah Zarah. Lo sa'asun kidmus shamashai. There's a lav, you're not allowed to make the image of any of shamashai, my servants, any of those things that sort of serve Hashem. So you're not allowed to make an image of the moon. How can Rabbi Gamliel have images of the moon? So Amar Abaye answers, Lo asr Torah ela shamoshin she'efshar lasos kemoson. When we're learning out that you're not allowed to make an image or something similar to one of those shamoshim, one of the servants of Hashem, we're talking about only servants where you can actually make a replica. So not something that represents it, but a replica. Kedatanya, like we learned in the Brisa, Lo yasa odom beis Bayis Tavnis Heichal, you're not allowed to build a house in the dimensions or the appearances of the Beis HaMikdash, the Heichal. Achsadra, a pavilion, an awning, a porch, whatever you want to translate Achsadra as. Tavnis Ulam, as the same sort of dimensions, shapes, and particulars of the Ulam in front of the Heichal of the Beis HaMikdash. Chatzar Keneged Azara, don't build a courtyard that looks like the Azara of the Beis HaMikdash. Shulchan Keneged Shulchan, a table that corresponds to the table in the Beis HaMikdash, menorah keneged menorah, or a menorah that corresponds or looks like the menorah from the Beis HaMikdash. Aval, osa shel chamisha v'shel shisha v'shel shmona. You can make a menorah that has 5, 6, or 8 branches. V'shel shiva lo yaseh, but a 7-branched menorah you should not make, because that is making something similar to that which is used to serve Hashem, and that is included in this iser of lo sa'asun iti. Don't make like many of my shamoshim. But according to Abaye, at this point, it doesn't include things that you cannot make a replica of.
So the Temple Institute in Israel?
Well, the Temple Institute in Israel, to be Melamed Zechus, I would say, to get around this problem, they're actually making it for the purposes of, when the Beis HaMikdash is built, there it is. So to their mind, it's the real deal. Right? They're not making they're not making replicas to.
Really? Is that what they have in mind?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
The old city.
I thought it was really just
the old city.
And we will get into later, by the time we get to the end of this sugya, the idea of making lilamed for teaching purposes is okay. So that gives them an even bigger out.
Yeah, that's what I imagined. Yeah.
Well, where are they going to look up and move over?
I always thought it was for teaching purposes.
But we have I think that one is the sort of the bigger one, because they're actually all to size and to scale in theory. For teaching you can do smaller ones, but also even just for teaching purposes, we will see there is a out for that. That there is a way to explain that away as well. So the Brisa continues, Afilu shel shar minei matchos, still talking about making a replica menorah, even if you make it out of any other metals. The menorah in the Beis HaMikdash was made out of gold, so you can't make a replica menorah of 7 branches, even out of silver or any other kind of metal. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda adds on and says, Af shel eitz, even wood is not allowed. You can't make a menorah out of wood. That would still fall under the same problem. Lo yasi, you shouldn't make it. The way that the kings of the Chashmonaim made it out of wood. After the Chashmonaim beat the Greeks, took back the Beis HaMikdash, and were trying to clean everything up, they had a big problem. Not only was all the oil tameh, all the kalim were tameh too. So they had to start get new things. Things were destroyed, things were missing, all kinds of problems. So the Gemara teaches us elsewhere that they had to build a new menorah. So according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda, that menorah that they built, that first one, was built out of wood. Because we learn from the Pasuk, Rashi brings down that he has a drasha called a ribuyan miuti, that from the Pasuk that you can, there's an exclusion and then a miut. So when it excludes everything, it brings in everything. So everything is included in here, all other materials, except for the one material that is the furthest thing away from gold, which is cheres, earthenware. So earthenware menorah, you would be allowed, it wouldn't be included in this, you would not be allowed to make a earthenware menorah, but anything else you can make for the Beis HaMikdash, you're allowed to make in the Beis HaMikdash out of any other metal, and wood would be included in that according to the way he is learning. So Amrulo, so they answer the other Rabbanim answered Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda and said, Misham Raya, that's not a proof. How can you bring a proof from there? It wasn't really made out of wood. Shepudin shel barzel hayu, they were spits, straight bars of iron. V'chipum bebatz, and they covered them, they plated them with tin. Hayashiru, when they became a little more wealthy, Asum shel kesef, they replaced it with a silver menorah. Chazru Hayashiru, they got even more wealthy, things became a little bit better. Asum shel zahav, then they replaced the menorah, the menorahs with a gold menorah. Tosfos points out a very interesting thing. The Gemara says, Shipudin shel barzel, straight, shipud is a spit, a straight piece. The menorah we know was all decorated. It has cups and buttons and flowers, everything on it. So Tosfos points out that the requirement for the menorah to have all these decorations is only when the menorah was made out of gold. So any other menorah made out of any other material didn't have that requirement, which is why this other menorah was made of shipudin, straight pieces. And they plated it with tin. I didn't really understand this myself. The Art Scroll points out that for some reason old tin looks like wood. I did a Google search to try to find pictures of old tin. I couldn't really find anything. So I'm going to take their word at it for the purposes of this discussion. Tin apparently doesn't really rust, so it would probably develop some kind of sort of brown shine or something. I'm not sure what would be, but tin is a corrosion-resistant material, so which is why they used it to plate things like iron, which rust very easily. But apparently that's why there was some confusion. Why else would he think it's made of wood? He just didn't pull it out of thin air. Okay, so the Gemara continues, Vishamashin she'efshar lasos kamoson mishari. So you, Abai, you said that anything that you cannot make a replica of, that's allowed. But is that really true? V'atanya, we learned in a brayso, lo sasun iti. Again, from the same pasuk, lo sasun iti, you're not allowed to make with me. Lo sasun kidmus shamashai hameshamshin lefonai pamaro. You are not allowed to make, for me, you're not allowed to make any figures of my servants, and it's specific here. This brisa says that serve before me bamarom, on the lofty heights, which would refer to things up in the sky, or more appropriately marom, the different malachim. So Amar Aryai said, Lo asra Torah elo demus arba upon him bahade hadadi. The only thing that the Torah is forbidding over here is the figure that has four faces together. We're going to have this psukim come from the Seres Adibros. We're going to read on the first day of Shavuos the Ma'aseh Merkava as the Haftarah, where the vision of what it looks like up in Shemayim. So it describes that the chayos that are right under the Kisei HaKavod have four faces. They have a man face, an ox face, a eagle face, and can't remember what the fourth one is.
Is it a lion?
Yeah, okay. So to make that kind of four-faced figure, that is what is being disallowed here, but nothing else. So a moon doesn't fall under that isser. So the Gemara asks, Elomeata, but from what you're saying over here, parts of Adam Lichudei Tishtari, you would be allowed to do, we said you can't do a four-faced figure, but a single-faced figure, just the face of man, that would seem to be then allowed. So Alama, Tanya, we learned, Kol ha-partsufos mutarin, you're allowed to make any face, any kind of relief of a face, chutz mi parts of Adam, except for that of a man. Except for that of a man. So how can you say that, Abai? That it's only the four-faced ones that are disallowed? We see very clearly that even a single face of a man is not allowed. So Amar Rav Huna Breiter of Idi Mefarke de Abai Shmioli from this pircha that we asked from this question on Abai, I can learn out Lo Sa'asun Iti. Lo sa'asun osi. We're learning out that when it says in the pasuk, do not make et with me, really osi, me. Because the depiction, not that we know what God looks like, but when we depict a picture of God, or the way Hashem is described, it's always described with human characteristics. We talk about the face of Hashem, the hand of Hashem. So when we're saying the reason you cannot make a image of a man is because it can be misconstrued to possibly be an image of, that you're trying to make an image of God, which would then be used for idol worship purposes. So the Gemara continues, Ushar Shamash and Mishari, are any of the other servants allowed? Vatanya, we learned in a Bryce, Lo Sasun Iti, we learn out from the pasuk, shall make with me, Lo Sasun Kidmus Shamoshai, you're not allowed to make in the image of my servants, Hamashamshin Lefonai Bamarom, that serve before me in the upper regions, Kigon, for example, Ofanim, Usrafim, V'chayos HaKodesh, Umalochi Asharis, all these different kinds of heavenly beings. So we see not just the Ophanim, not just the four-faced ones, but all these other different kinds of heavenly beings as well are also not allowed. So Ela Omer Abaya says, no, Lo Asr Torah Ela Shamoshin Shebimodar HaElyon. Only those, when we say you're not allowed to make any of these things, means only those that are in the highest level of Shamayim. There are seven levels of Shamayim and Aretz below. So these are all things that live right by the Kisei HaKavod, right up at the top. So those are the things that you're not allowed to make. But things that are in the lower levels, such as the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, etc., those are not included. Those you would be allowed to make. So Abai modifies his answer. As we keep raising objections, he keeps fine-tuning the answer. But so then are you saying that those that are on the lower levels of the Shamayim are allowed to be made? Vatanya, we learned in a Brisa, Asher Bashamayim, the pasuk over there continues, you're not allowed to make Asher Bashamayim Mimalva. Sorry, the pasuk escapes me for a moment. We have it here. Asher Bashamayim Mimalva, Asher Ba'aretz Mitachas, Asher B'mayim Mitachas La'aretz. So Asher Bashamayim L'Rabos Chama U'Levana Kochovim U'Mazalos. When it says in the heavens, that comes to include in this prohibition the sun, the moon, the stars, and the constellations. Mimal, the heavens above. L'Rabos Malachi Hasharis. That comes to include the Malachi Hasharis. So we see from here that even those in the lower heavenly regions, such as the sun and the moon, are also you're not allowed to make as idols. So Kitanya, when we learn that, Gemara's answering, when we learn that, Hahila Avdam. This pasuk is talking about making them to serve them as idols. So you're allowed to have them, but there's no all the issues we quoted before of Lo Sa'asun Iti refer to making. You're not allowed to make such things, even if you don't serve them as idols. The prohibition in this pasuk is you are not allowed to make these things to serve as idols. So
the things that are three-dimensional as opposed to two-dimensional, right?
Correct. So
how could this be a question? How could it be a question if you know what it's doing?
Well, it's not a question. It's just saying when the pasuk is saying that these things are not allowed, it's referring to it's not, you're not allowed to make them for the purposes of avodah zarah. This is the pasuk that tells you are not allowed to serve these things as avodah zarah. So when you say these things are three-dimensional, you're talking about the isser of making them as three-dimensional objects. Yeah. That's a whole different topic. That what you're allowed to make 3D, 2D. The Gemara will get into whether it's raised or in relief.
When I say two, I mean flat.
Yeah, no, I get that. I guess, so there are certain things that we do not allow even 2D images of, flat, printed, painted images, certain things that are allowed, and even between that, there are many machlokas rishonim on what is included in which segment. So Elovdim. So the Gemara asks, if we're saying that the pasuk there is to exclude, to bring an isser, you're not allowed to serve images of the sun, the moon, the stars. Afilu shilshul katan nami. Even a small little worm, you can't make a little worm statue, and you're not allowed to serve any statue. Why specifically these things? So. In Hachanami, Gemara says you are correct, the Tanya, because we also learned Asher ba'aretz. The pasuk, as we read before, continues also Asher b'shamay mimal, Asher ba'aretz mitachas, Asher b'may mitachas la'aretz. So when it says so, Asher ba'aretz l'rabos har mugvos yamim unaharos afikim ugvayos. That when we say that are on the land, that includes all these mountains and peaks and seas and rivers, every kind of geographical feature. Mitachas, we say below, l'rabos shilshul katan, to include even a small little worm. So these things are all included in the pasuk. This pasuk is saying you are not allowed to make any kind of image to serve. So the Gemara then continues, Vasia Gredasa Mishari. So we've dealt with whether or not having and whatnot, but just to make it, are you allowed to just even make these things? Vahatanya. We learned in a Raizel, lo sa'asun iti, back to our pasuk, you're not allowed to make with me. Lo sa'asun kidmush shamoshai, hameshamshin lefonai, you are not allowed to make a image of my servants that serve before me, kidgon, chama uluvona, the sun, the moon, kochavim mazolos, stars, and the constellations. So we now have a clear brisa, after going through all these other brisas that sort of progressively bring us to the point, we now have a clear brisa that says you are not allowed to make the sun, the moon, the stars, and the constellations. So how does Rabbi Gamliel get these things? Shiny Rabbi Gamliel's case is different. The Gemara answers, Da'acherim asulo. He hired some goyim to make it for him, and they don't have this prohibition of making these things, so it was okay.
But he still has them.
So right now the Gemara is talking about the question of asiya, making, right?
I understand, but they're still his. I mean, who cares who makes it? I still have them on me.
So we have two separate isurim here. We have an isur to make them and an isur to serve them. We haven't come across yet an isur to own them. But the Gemara asks from a case, Rav Yehuda da'acherim asulo. There's a Rav Yehuda had, Rashi just says, a kind of signet ring that he had, some the others were made for him. V'amar le Shmuel, Rav Yehuda, and Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, shinin, a sharp one, which is how Shmuel referred to Rav Yehuda, sami eine didain, blind the eye of this. So, in other words, Rashi says, well, Rashi has sort of two contradictory things going on here. Rashi sort of midway down, V'harav Yehuda says Shahaisol Atzura b'Tabah. So he had this image on a ring. V'acherim asua, other people made it. V'amalei Shmuel the neshilke mine, that he should take it off. He should just remove the image entirely. Is how Rashi explains that. But then in translating, Samei Eine Kilomer Hashchais Tzuraso, says destroy its image, deface it. So Rashi has two contradictory translations on what Shmuel actually told him. Either this whole thing is no good, or deface it so that it's no longer has that image, unsullied image that you may be an issue that for what we're going to get into.